Thank you all for joining us and welcome to our series. My name is Lisa Booth. I'm the Executive Director here at the University of Florida Center for European Studies. The UF Center for European Studies is a Jean Monnet Center of Excellence, and we are also a Title VI National Resource Center for European Studies. A few housekeeping notes before we begin. We will be recording this and the talk will be available on our UF website, and that's www.ces.ufl.edu. We also have a podcast channel, and I encourage you to check that out, and you can find information about that on the website. We will have a Q&A discussion afterwards, and we're very happy to have all of you submit questions. Please do so in the Q&A button on the bottom of your screens, and we will get to those and then will be read out. So today we are, technical difficulties. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to be discussing Dr. Diana Mencite's work, and she is going to present Sustainability European Style: Urban Farming, Alternative Food Economies, and the Politics of Civic Participation. This talk and the virtual series are supported by the EU Erasmus Plus Jean Monnet program. And we would also like to thank our co-sponsors, Santa Fe College here in Gainesville. This discussion is part of our UF Jean Monnet Center of Excellence rescheduled Spring 2020 seminar and workshop on Achieving Sustainability in the EU, Beyond the 3 Rs. This series explores EU sustainability practices from a range of perspectives and industries, including politics, economics, urban planning, agriculture, transportation, and more. And as we all know, had we not had a pandemic strike, we would be hosting this live and in person. So our speaker today is Dr. Diana Mencite. She is an associate professor of sociology at City University of New York. Her research focuses on citizenship, self-reliance, and sustainability in Eastern Europe and beyond. Prior to joining City University, she held fellowships at the Rachel Carson Center at the Ludwig Maximilians University in Munich, Germany, the Agrarian Studies program at Yale University, and European and Mediterranean Studies at New York University. She was also a visiting fellow in the Mine de Günzburg Center for European Studies at Harvard University. And I apologize, that was Günzburg, not Ginsburg. Moderating today's Q&A session is Dr. Agata Kovalevska. She's a lecturer here at the University of Florida Center for European Studies, and she served as our faculty liaison for the Spring 2020 Jean Monnet workshop seminar on achieving sustainability in the EU. And Dr. Kovalevska is also a nutritionist, and she has become our resident expert on EU sustainability practices. So with that, I will hand the discussion over to Dr. Mencite. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be part of the conversation at the time when we only are able to have such conversations virtually. I would like to use slides to make sure that I'm communicating more clearly. So let me transition into to share the screen with slides so that you are able to follow me more clearly. So, okay, I think this is on. So my point of perhaps the goal of this presentation is to look at sustainability from the ground up. I am trained in sociology and I am an ethnographer in terms of methodology. So I look at the practices and narratives and ideas that form the basis for practicing certain kinds of activities in agriculture and food, in particularly that yield themselves to life affirming and sustaining kind of practices. And the EU is an interesting, of course, case study because it has a very clear agenda and policy parameters in which sustainability is encouraged. But today I would like to begin and actually look at sustainability from the particular case study of urban farming in Lithuania. And from that, I will do a short reflection on the politics of civic participation. Who gets to participate in sustainability? What is the vision of sustainability in the EU that we can see from this corner of urban farming in Lithuania? And then talk a little bit about the concept of vernacular sustainabilities, ideas that are not necessarily ensconced in policies, but they do emerge locally and in contexts that are outside of the kind of urban centers, Western Europe, that is the leader of the EU policy debates. So globally, urban farming is seen as an important contributor to sustainability movements on the ground from this kind of grassroots perspective. In general, 800 million people, 1 in 10 persons worldwide practice urban agriculture. There are different kinds of urban agriculture. It is, we start with kitchen gardening, including terraces and balconies. There are also allotments that are, for example, very popular in Austria and German-speaking world, where people are, in Britain as well, while it's still part of the EU to a certain extent. So it's allocated to individual gardeners. But there are more important kind of, for the perspective of communal involvement, community gardens that are cultivated by groups of people, and they're using the land that is privately owned or publicly owned. There are also institutional farms, including hospitals. Schools are very popular, but also prisons as well. Urban farms are more entrepreneurial in the sense that they tend to sell their produce or for profit or non-profit. They have a certain kind of particular sets of goals that they are seeking to achieve beyond just the kind of grassroots community gardens organized around, several people getting together and working together. So they have more entrepreneurial goal, and there is a number of growing indoor farms which are increasingly are getting a lot of attention these days because of the pandemic, and you get these not just aquaponics, hydroponics, but LED light emitting diode technologies that are used to develop these boxes that individuals can go ahead and buy and develop a small garden in their small apartments in New York or wherever. So there are a couple of dissertations coming out of this kind of interesting ways of bringing the garden into your home that is not in the domestic space. So there are all these types of urban farming. And as a sustainability practice, it's understood to be helping with food security and poverty alleviation. People who do not have access to food are able to grow it, and that's creating a lot of questions about whether it is an individual response, to what extent it's a responsibility of the state and the other taxpayers to share their resources and create conditions for people being able to buy food versus expecting them to procure food themselves. And that's particularly important in the United States, where you see a lot of farmers, a lot of migrants, for example, and immigrants and refugees are encouraged to continue cultivating their food with an idea that this teaches them the skills of survival, except that very often this goes against their other efforts to integrate themselves in society better. So that's just one minor detour, but there are generally agreed upon criteria saying that urban farming provides biodiversity and ecosystems services. They support pollinators, soil restoration, reduces heat island effects, mitigates floods, composts waste. It really has, from the kind of ecosystems perspective, urban farming is very important and helpful, and we want to see more of it. Then there are social and health benefits. neighborhoods get involved, people get outside, they develop the kind of community sense. There is also a big literature on the mental health impact, how helpful it is for individuals to be outside working with other people. Economic benefits, of course, urban farms in various contexts. Berlin is and the Netherlands in general are very at the forefront of this in Europe, in the United States as well. Detroit, New York, other places also have a lot of social entrepreneurship happening, a lot of these supply urban farmers markets, and it's this kind of thriving food economy, alternative food economy to the conventional food economy. And of course there is urban development dimension that is very positively seen, as it allows for the emergence of alternative public spaces that we lack in current urban design efforts. So in the EU, however, urban farming falls between the cracks of two policy platforms, so to speak. National member state rural development programs tend to not include urban farming simply because they fall outside of the conventional farms and there is no lobbyism for it. So what would be a natural extension of the Pillar 1 of the Common Agricultural Policy is also not necessarily including a peri-urban in the fringes of the cities where you have smaller farmers kind of farming. They are able to use direct payments and apply for them, but not the urban farmers themselves. So what is interesting about urban farming in this perspective is that it really is truly a grassroots movement. And because of that, it has this patchwork of institutions. There are coalitions of urban farms in the EU and around the world, but it requires a much deeper engagement on the community level. And that's why we are looking with my colleagues into urban farming in Lithuania to understand what it takes to develop an urban farm that is sustainable in a post-socialist space, in a space that has a history of urban farming under socialism that was dachas, known for the Russian word, that individual households were able to farm in a small, outside of the city land plots, along with post-socialist hardships that people went back into self-provisioning. And again, interestingly, in the pandemic context, we have everywhere a big resurgence of these practices. But within Eastern Europe, it provides a different kind of measure and a different kind of entry point to think about these issues. Now, there is very little written about Eastern European urban farms, and if it's written from this perspective of Western urban farms. And that's justifiable because you want to connect to that literature. And that literature has a number of threads, but just to highlight several of them, there is a huge focus on justice and inequalities, a truly valuable contribution to these debates. And it shows how race, class, and gender really shapes experiences of urban farming in Western Europe and the United States. And there are critiques of whiteness that very often, for example, Julie Guthman talks about the problem when young, well-educated, white urban farmers see urban farming as a space for, digging their hands into the soil, that really marginalizes some of the kind of efforts to undermines these efforts to create spaces for really self-provisioning and poverty alleviation and people producing for themselves for food. So there is a lot of hip activities surrounding it, and women tend to also be more involved in alternative food networks than men. So it's kind of this is a bundle of issues that create inequalities, tensions, and undermine some of the goals of urban farming and its social community building lofty goals. Another large strand in this literature is that the urban farms are reproducing neoliberalism. And of course, there has been all this talk about what neoliberalism is, and actually, can we even talk now about what neoliberalism? We're kind of living already in a different kind of mode, perhaps post-neoliberalism, but the work that has looked at it, they show how urban farms are often functioning at the forefront of gentrification, how they create conditions for what Marit Russell, for example, talks about, this site for playing of the wealthier, again, white, young urban farmers, as opposed leisure kind of activity versus an effort to kind of really change more, develop a much more sustainable in terms of the long term, but more socially engaged community. So the neoliberal idea is that you need to, to revitalize the city, you need yourself to, organize versus invest and require and call for the state to help create these conditions, is evident here, that we put these efforts, in the hands of participants themselves, rather than lobbying the cities to actually clean up the places themselves. And there is an emerging literature that is very important, and then I think this is perhaps the most cutting edge literature that is coming from the Barcelona center. Isabel Angela-Vázquez, I always butcher her name, work looking at informalities and the spaces that are in Eastern Europe usually kind of the squatter urban farming, when people just see a plot land and they go and work it because that's where they see appropriate and they can do and procure food for themselves, and that kind of there is kind of attention being drawn to it that kind of creates more grassroots efforts to for self-sustaining activities and transforming the landscape as well. So to understand the features, the particularities of that post-socialist East European context of urban farming, we studied urban farming movement in Lithuania. And by we, I mean two of the participants who I assume are on this call. And I will show you their names in the next slide so you can see them, but these are just pictures from these farms. It's Aiste Bartkienė and Renata Bikauskaitė. They are the force behind this project because they did all the legwork and all the interviews, ethnographic work that involved literally working in urban farms, and not only themselves but also their family members. So this is really, I'm piggybacking on this to showcase this this work. So what they did ethnographic field work, and we also have 19 semi-structured interviews and multi-salted approach, which required to move beyond just these interviews, but also look at the larger political debate in institutions, speaking with the governmental officials about the support that urban farmers get, etc. So it kind of gives a sense of how urban farming kind of operates. What we would like to highlight today is this internal dynamics of urban farms in Eastern Europe. From my conversation with others in the field, is very similar. And we found that there are two divergent ways of thinking about what it means to care for the land and for the environment and for the plants and for the city and for climate change as well. we find that history is central. Whether people will participate in urban farms depends on their experiences and relationship to that socialist history. In the region, more broadly, it means, again, the socialist, post-socialist experience of farming and self-provisioning is central. We also find how deeply ingrained the gendering is of care work, that women are expected to do more of the weeding, men are expected to do more of the organizing, which is, to a certain extent, the Baltic states are really the vanguard of gender politics unexpectedly, because they actually at the top of the world in terms of women owning land, which is very significantly more than the rest of Western Europe comparatively. But it's still, we can see how that gender plays out. And it also speaks how this kind of speaks of regional inequalities. And I will stop here so that I move through the studies so that we have time to talk about this. This research has already been published. It came out in Geoforum. It's already available. It's formally coming out in October in Geoforum, but it's already available since September. So what are these two modes of care? We have a younger generation of farmers who talk about urban farming in terms of self-realization. Farming is leisure for them, going out and enjoying it. They are also very proactively and reflexive about working on the farms as a collective effort. They view it as a communal effort. And in that sense, they are really truly these ecological citizens who are seeking to create a world that has a different kind of logic of the cities. They talk about looking from changing the city, that it makes it more pedestrian, makes it more amenable for community's involvement, and they are working hard to address they see it as a climate change as this front and center of their agendas. And then there is the older generation who really focus on care for the plants and individual plants in particular. They are interested in working alone, or collaborating with older generation. They would prefer to have individual allotments rather than working on these more collective communal farms. And they approach farming in terms of kinship, and I show a very interesting quote, but they also grow up from this kind of generation where they themselves were expected to help their families to work on the gardens because their families depended on food to be procured for themselves. So it was this intergenerational responsibility within the family, rather than thinking about climate change and these bigger generational challenges that the younger generation sees. So just a couple of examples of the younger generation, how they talk about this urban farming. They think about it as a meditation with my hands submerged in the soil. They talk about, we don't care about how much produce we produce. We share our responsibilities on the farm. If I cannot stop to buy to weed or water the plants for a couple of weeks, there is always going to be somebody who will. We want to share work. This is not the goal to produce as much food as possible. And they see it truly as a public good. They say, to care for public goods means to prioritize the interests of the whole society over that of private citizens and companies. And urban farms should be considered as this public good. And that's their way of contributing to being this ecological citizenship, as Andrew Dobson writes in his work. However, the older generation looks at it very differently. So I want to quote this quote from the interview with an older farmer who says that farming is about the focus and meeting the needs of an individual farm plant. When you plant a seedling, you have to treat it as a small child. You have to take care of it, look after it, pamper and water it. A human being eats 3 times a day and drinks maybe more than 5 times. But here on the farm, nothing was done to them until July. That is, all the younger generation are going on vacations, they have kids, they have other involvements, so they just show up here and there. So she says all tomatoes were let go without any pruning. God knows what fruit they will bear. Those who manage to grow will grow on because of the warm summer this year and some residual humidity coming from the nearby bushes. And you, little plant, you have to fend for yourself trying to survive. You can continue your existence only if somebody will have mercy on you and decide to water on you. It's a very interesting way of anthropomorphizing a plant, looking at a plant as a human being, as a small child for which you have a responsibility. It is a markedly different relationship to the land, to the understanding of one's place in the state and sustainability. It's about focusing on that particular relationship and responsibility. So this is what I briefly kind of showed. To understand where these very different ideas are coming from, we need to look at this Soviet socialist history of collectivization and the establishment of subsidiary farms and dachas, which interestingly, and how, I mean, Soviets were true neoliberals in the sense that they expected the workers and farmers kind of produce so much for themselves and for the state on their private, small, rather than private, individual land. And again, it was the family-based, household-based efforts to mobilize through self-exploitation that later, during the post-socialist era and the restitution of land property rights and the crumbling of the collective forms of production, and that's different in Agata's case for Poland that did not have these collective farms, but yet everywhere across Europe we have this really intense self-provisioning emerging after the end of socialism because they do not have any subsidies for farmers. They are competing on global, expected to compete on with global markets, and they are end up in the position there. There's just enormous poverty. And then since Europe, since joining the EU in 2004, East European, not just the elites, there has been an influx and a vision of thinking beyond the kind of self-provisioning into seeking to become this extensions of the Enlightenment project, to become truly European citizens and global citizens, looking not only for your own survival, but the kind of trying to think about larger community and bringing in these goals and making these sustainability goals their own. And that's why we start seeing the urban farmers really taking on this idea that urban farming is about freedom, as opposed, for the younger generation, as opposed of being expected to do what your grandmother tells you to do during summer, when you are expected to spend your summer working alongside with her in the garden, right? That it's a communal work instead of this individualized, not with your friends, you're forced to do this, right? And what emerges, interesting, it's a side note, but the aesthetics of these farms are so fascinatingly different. The old dachas are very productivist, they're very clean, there is very clear design where they're weeded, and they have clearly designated beds. And then on these urban farms, it's much more organic. This kind of Western ideas about wild agriculture comes in, and you start seeing it less caring about the weeding, etc., etc. So that's where the what happens on these urban farms, these two historical ideas about what farming means are intersecting. And yet, at the end of the day, who does all the work on the farms? It is older women, because there's this kind of pervasive gender stereotypes, I would say. I mean, I was even reluctant to share this quote, but I want to read a little bit. It says that a young man who is volunteering on this farm, he says, as an overseer, I'm not a weed picker. Weeding is more of a woman's job because it requires diligence. Men act more as helpers, and other men are more as organizers. So we get that care work gets performed by women, and mostly older women. And that, at the end of the day, we see that but these women are not really fitting the mold of what this ecological European citizen is expected to be, who is forward-looking and who is expected to be truly meeting the ideas of civic participation. So tying back to the EU urban farming politics is that within the European Green Deal programs really emphasized and along with other policies emphasize their focus on conventional farming. And when they talk about these smaller initiatives such as urban farms, they tend to focus on social and technological innovations and education. They don't focus on subsistence farmers. They don't focus on these more existing forms of self-provisioning that are prevalent across Eastern Europe. So perhaps as we move forward, we need to carve out a space that would reconsider that civic participation, not only in terms of ideas that are common in the tradition of West European civic action movement, but more in terms of local conditions. So because both groups, both urban farmers groups in Lithuania work together, and as a result, they both contribute to this sustainability effort. So I'll stop here. I would love to engage in a discussion and see where we can get from this. And again, Aiste and Renata are here and hopefully might also chime in. But these are the our supporters, but also the contact information. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana, for the presentation. And I have some questions from the audience and also some questions that relate to my own work with food production and Europe. So let's start with the questions from the audience, and it's about the urban planning and primarily the cost of creating urban gardens. As we know, the land within the city is always more expensive than farmland. So is there a way how Europe is trying to equalize the price of the land that it's used within the city, help city farmers in being able to use the land for farming? And is there any other help maybe within the Green Deal or individual by member states into encourage urban farming on land that can potentially be used for building another shopping mall, or having a movie theater there, or developing it as apartment buildings?
So 2 points here. There is no unified policy, or even at this point efforts to be able to provide institutional support for the urban farms on the EU level. each government has a patchwork of support mechanisms, but they really fall short in countries such as Germany, France, and the Netherlands. They are able to really mobilize. They were able to mobilize, and the city is able to issue certain areas in the city that are by the parks. In Lithuania too was by the park, but the land. But generally, there has been an issue with this lack of over institutional support. However, there are movements that have a much stronger lobbyism. CAP is the largest item on the budget, EU's budget. So there is a movement to actually the right to farm movement across the EU. It's popular in France in particular, that that is seeking to create the kind of conditions in which the farmers, especially the young farmers, they are going through the measure that supports the young farmers in particular, to be able to get access to the land, even if they don't have the capital or support to farming. So there is a sense of some of the cross-pollination, but there hasn't been a unified efforts. However, in terms of competition, commercial versus urban farming development, a lot of brands are embracing urban farms. For example, in Lithuania, Kempinski Hotel, a 5-star hotel, has developed urban farm on top of a rooftop garden that has beehives, and it has its own honey that's being given to the guests. So, and shopping malls there is this sense in which I think we would argue this is this kind of aestheticization of sustainability, that in some ways it becomes part of this branding efforts to cast yourself in this way of being a sustainable brand when you are bringing on the urban farmers onto your property and commercial property activities. So a great question. It's very interesting to see this kind of who is the authentic true urban farmer and who is kind of just trying to do the hard work of organizing, and who is in some ways using it, but also nevertheless they have these great ecological impact on their rooftops, so to speak.
Yes, exactly. So I have a questions about seeds and possibly bank of seeds in Europe. Are there seeds banks in Europe? Is there any way of sharing the seeds between, urban farmers across the countries? Europe has pretty strict rules about plants, moving plants. So how does this play in Lithuania or across the state's border?
So I must say this because I didn't spend time on the urban farm itself, so I only rely on my collaborators to answer that particular question in that sense. But seeds are a very touchy question, especially for the Baltic states, because they were part of the Soviet Union, and some of the plants that were developed in the Soviet Union are not actually cannot be registered as the European farms. And in Latvia, and Guntra Ishtara has written about it brilliantly, that how there has been even arrests because the farmers were using these older tomato seeds to grow plants that are no longer recognized registered in the EU. So there are a number of global seed saving seeds banks. There is a notable one in Belgium that that collects it. But I think for the urban farms, the ones that are functioning in Lithuania, there is really the dependence on the local kinship-based family seeds, in particular tomatoes and some other plants, but mostly relying on companies. And actually, one of the companies was helping to fund the urban farms because they didn't have money for paying for water and tools, and they were getting funding from a seed company who recognized this as their part of their mission to support these urban farmers. So it relies more on commercial sector rather than the kind of EU efforts or the seed banks. It's a very locally based system, but a very important one, of course.
Yes, generation to generation. Another question from the audience is about the generational difference in how people perceive urban farming. And judging by your interviews and the full research that you have conducted in Lithuania, do you think that rift between the older and younger generation will be getting smaller, or it's the matter of the generation that perceive urban farming as a woman's role of looking after that single plant will have to die out for the new view of urban farming to take over?
This is the big question. So, I mean, the idea would probably be that this more productivist idea about really getting as much as you can from the plant by attending to its needs probably would give its way to the more ecological citizen ideas of communal care, changing the big picture idea was on its way until the pandemic hit. And then my understanding is that it's not only in Lithuania, but everywhere around Europe, in the United States, the seeds were bought out. Everybody went back into this kind of gardening. I mean, it just there has been an enormous lack of seeds in the United States. That's not that they have not seen ever before. So that pandemic really exposed the fragility of the food system that relies so much on long provision chains, large-scale agriculture that is vulnerable. When it breaks in ways that affects so many people. So I think for Eastern Europe that has this long tradition of self-provisioning and people still have these former dachas and access to the farms, that lack of food provisioning wasn't, it kind of just like it was a spike, but not to the kind of spike that was in Western Europe, but it definitely highlighted and brought back these debates. And in the newspapers, for example, the mayors were begging the older generation, do not get on the buses to go to your gardens in April because you will get sick. But they did anyway because they wanted to go and farm. This is what you do when the pandemic hits.
Yeah, you go outside to be on the sun, and the earth is waiting. I have a question about there is initiative, and I have to admit I'm not familiar with that one, Urban by Nature. And is that initiative or any other US sponsored initiative in any way connected to the farming in Lithuania or urban farming in Lithuania?
No, which is posing a very different and interesting set of questions. Even in studies of the EU urban farming, the Baltic states, Lithuania and Latvia. Estonia as always is at the forefront of everything, so they are included, but the two Baltic states were excluded from the largest study of urban farming that provides a report on the state of the EU farming. And they are not on the map. They are truly what would be considered this grassroots. They literally did it themselves, and with the idea of really bringing in these the European style urban farming, because the old style Dutchess urban farming continues to exist, but they wanted to have a different kind of urban farms, and they have been kind of excluded from these conversations, not necessarily because they decided they're not worthy or something, but by default they are small. They seem to be not connected to the right people in the networks of these NGOs, and to participate you need to have funding, you need to attend conferences, who has time. So it really kind of shows how much capital and institutional support you need to create the conditions for this more connected, more sharing resources, seeds, sharing information and sharing knowledge, networks of sustainability that urban farming exemplifies, and it's not there, unfortunately.
And I think we will take this last question, and this is about this circular economy in the post-socialistic countries. So do you see development of the idea in the Eastern Europe, which is slightly different than the Western EU?
Great question. Just starting a project on this, and honestly, I'm on the fence. I think there are indigenous vernacular forms of circular economy, but that's not what EU is trying to do. It's very much innovation driven. It's about technologies. It's about large-scale solutions. It focuses on the business solutions from what I see in the European Green Deal. And I would hope there will be a way for connecting it. And that research project is, in fact, it's with all three Baltic states that we are trying to develop on the circular economy, is trying to see what is our stake in this? Can we rethink it and make it palatable to the EU, to Brussels, so that it actually
and work in those particular countries?
Exactly. But that's, I mean, it's kind of amazing. This is the last question, because that's the next step. for us.
Excellent. So I believe we are right on time to let you go to your next activities. And thank you very much for the conversation. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate that opportunity, and I look forward to crossing paths and talking. And if you, anybody has any questions, please reach out. Would be great to connect, especially if you're doing work in this area. Would be wonderful to connect and continue.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kowalewska, and thank you, Dr. Mincinte, and everyone who joined us. You will be getting a survey at the end of this, and we ask you to please, I know we're all busy, but please take the time to fill out the survey. These things will help us get better at this new virtual world, and also let us know the things you're interested in. I know we have a number of grad students who are interested in topics like Dr. Mincinte presented today, so please do fill out those surveys. And thank you so very much for joining us today. Goodbye.